In the beginning, Square created some games that no one has heard of as part of Denyu Sha, until they became an independent company. Then they created a whole bunch of games that nobody bought, and the corporate bank account was void, and darkness was over the faces of the accountants, and the spirit of failure was hovering over the face of Miyamoto. And Miyamoto said, "Sakaguchi, make Final Fantasy," and he did. And Miyamoto saw that the game was good, and Miyamoto sold the game to the customers. And Miyamoto called the game a success, and eventually the customers fools, and sold them all the bravest about 20 years down the line. Anyway, before someone from Square Enix comes to stab me, or a Christian comes to stab me, or the bloke currently banging on my window wielding a machete figures out that he can walk around and come in through the door to stab me, I'll tell you about Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is a game that was named in the attitude that it probably wouldn't matter what the damn thing was called since nobody was buying any of Square's games and the company was looking in a bad way. Then Sakaguchi had the bad manners to make the company's Requiem its saving grace, and we've ended up with about 20 or 30 games purporting to be the final one, and historians in the future are going to dig up our corpses just to shout at us and tell us to get a grip. Name aside, Final Fantasy really did save Square's bacon, and with good reason. It was one of only a limited number of games to offer an RPG experience on a console, and it did it with a good degree of competency, so there's really no reason to complain about the sentiment. Of course, this game somewhat predated the 30 trillion cells that comprise my lowly form, and so I first played it when it was released on the GBA, and I have to say I found it rather wonderful, and have never stopped coming back to it since. It boasts a reasonably interesting world, a mercifully simple driving motivation, and some nice combat and levelling mechanics. It's not without its flaws. To say that the original lacked polish would be an understatement. Why, for example, would you make it an option to target a creature which another hit had already killed? I think if I were the world's last hope, I would have learned to hit something else if someone had already taken out my first target, although I do wonder if the warrior would be capable of such brain-bending gymnastics as these, as his biceps have a greater mass than his head. Actually, if you start looking at the ideology behind Square's corporate history, it becomes a perfect rags-to-riches story, or even better, it becomes the Count of Monte Cristo. A young, fresh-faced protagonist has a comfortable life and modest success before they are betrayed, in this case by market conditions rather than a colleague, and must invent themselves anew, eventually returning and punishing those who betrayed them by releasing Final Fantasy XIII, before taking their revenge too far and releasing all the bravest, as opposed to driving their friend's love's family to insanity and almost killing the woman in question. Sadly, they are yet to show us all a twisted form of mercy by starving us half to death. I say sadly.